Thank you for joining us for the BRF podcast. We will be releasing content from several classes that were recorded during the 2025 Brethren Bible Institute. Brethren Revival Fellowship, BRF, is a concerned movement among the brethren, seeking to call the church to stand firm for the authority of the Scriptures and to an emphasis upon the teachings of the New Testament as historically understood by the brethren. We work in the interest of proclaiming and preserving biblical values for living today. Thank you for listening. We hope that this content enriches your spiritual life and inspires you to continue fighting the good fight of faith.
We are going to spend the day looking at the ministry years of Jesus, and we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the women at the cross. So, the first, according to John, the first of the signs Jesus did at Cana of Galilee. And Mary was involved in that one. Being a mother, and I mentioned this yesterday, was Mary's greatest strength. It was also her greatest weakness. One of Satan's favorite strategies is to take our greatest strength and turn it into our greatest weakness. I can remember my youth group days vividly. I can remember being at youth group and saying dumb stuff and walking out and saying, I'm never talking again. And lo and behold, next youth group, I would say something else dumb. And I still say dumb stuff because the things that I say are my greatest strength, which also can become my greatest weakness. For some people, their ability is to earn money, to collect money, to accumulate money. Satan will use that as their greatest weakness. To say, you're great at accumulating money, you need to build a big house. And you need to build a big car, buy a big car. And you need an entertainment system in your house. And you need a boat, and you need a second house up in the mountains. That stuff's never really tempted me all that much. I just bought a pickup truck. I think it'll hold together. It's got rust in really bad places, but I think it'll be okay for a while. It's replacing some of the veterans here know that I used to drive a yellow car, which I drove for a year and a half illegally. It failed inspection, and I kept on driving the thing. And then when it started to have radiator problems, I decided, you know what, it's probably time to replace this. But our greatest strength turned into our greatest weakness. If your strength is love and affection, it can turn into sexual immorality. And so that goes both ways. If you understand your strengths, be careful of how Satan's going to use that for a weakness. On the other hand, if you've got a weakness, try and figure out how God can use that. God can use that for a strength. So being a mother was Mary's greatest strength. At the temple of the 12-year-old Jesus, I know I lost God. I love God at the temple. I think she forgot. In the midst of all the other kids, she kind of forgot that she was raising God. Here at the wedding, you're 30 years old, the clock is ticking. Maybe he needs a little bit of a push. I'm not saying anything extraordinary here. If you go into some of the apocryphal writings, they have stories of Jesus as a little boy taking clay in the street and turning it into birds and then giving life to them and they fly away. Or they will have stories of Joseph being a really bad carpenter and he will make something and Jesus will fix it. And so then Joseph wound up going into king's palaces because of the reputation for his carpentry, and Jesus kept having to tag along and fix Joseph's stuff. There are no signs of that. John says right here, last slide, this is the first of his miracles. And she is constantly trying to pull him from his ministry. You see that if you go through the Gospels, where you see his brothers and his sister and mother outside. And they're worried about him. And Jesus says, behold, my brothers and my sisters and my mother are right here. And she's broken at the cross. Mary, at the Cana of Galilee wedding, was probably related to the groom. The reason the groom's side is because the groom was the one that was responsible for stuff. So we see that Jesus and his disciples were invited. This is very soon after the first 6 disciples were called. After Jesus was baptized, they come back to Cana, and the disciples are there. His brothers and maybe his sisters were there. We'll see that a slide down here. The groom was responsible for the food and wine. That's why I said that Mary is probably related to the groom. As a matter of fact, if the wedding feast was not up to standards, the bride's family could sue you. That's kind of adding injury to insult. Not only is the food run out, but the bride's family sues you. And Mary is probably related to the groom because she knew about the looming shortage. Somebody is coming over to Mary and said, hey man, they are running out of wine here. We're down to the last half container over here. And one of the interesting things we see with Jesus when he performs the miracle is Jesus doesn't say, go refill all the wine containers. Didn't that make more logical sense? He takes the water containers. We don't have room in the in the wine containers. Let's take these water containers and fill them with water and turn them into wine. Mary felt responsible. Some way or the other, she felt, we should do something here. Brenda and I, for years, did weddings. Now, nobody's doing weddings at the church anymore, so it's been a while since we've done a wedding. But, to be honest, there are some times, because we're kind of in the loop so much. I remember my nephew's wedding. There was a buffet. And I am looking, and so I'm taking the last of the beef in the buffet, and I know that there's more beef somewhere. Not my problem. I started to look somebody up and say, dude, where's the beef? We got to get the beef back in here. But she felt responsible in some way. And again, I think this is the mothering thing. There's something about a mother that feels responsible. Her family was not wealthy, so was that why they were out of wine? Somebody thought maybe the disciples added to the wine shortage. There were 6 more people here than they were planning on inviting. And all of a sudden you're looking around and say, who are these guys? And Nathaniel drinks a lot of wine, So maybe she felt responsible because Jesus' disciples added to the crowd. Weddings traditionally lasted a week. And we see after this, it says in John 2:12, after the wedding, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples. So we see that his brothers and presumably his sisters were at the wedding as well, and they stayed there for a few days. So even this early in the ministry, we see that his brothers and his sisters and his mother are following him in the ministry. The concept of the week-long weddings. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. That to me is like the funniest verse in the entire Bible. I still not wrap my mind around that one. About how it happened that we had a wedding feast. Was Leah even present at the wedding feast? Maybe not. I don't know. They just had a feast, and we kind of looked at this on Monday, how women were just kind of part of it. And when we go down, we're going to see a little bit the the women are kind of necessary for the wedding, let's put it that way. It's hard to get married without a wife. But beyond that, they were kind of a side issue here. But in the morning, it was Leah. And he rolled over and said, "Who are you?" And she said, "I'm Leah." And he said, "Were you here all night?" And she says, "Yes, I was here all night. I'm now your wife. We got married." And Jacob said to Laban, "What's this you've done to me?" That would just be an interesting discussion as Jacob is walking out and saying, "Dude, you gave me the wrong daughter. What's going on here? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "It's not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week for this one." You see how personal this is. Do the week for this one, and we'll give you the other one also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave his daughter to Rachel to be his wife, and they had another week. And Rachel had her week. And so, again, it's not very personal stuff back in those days. And you wonder how much Leah and Rachel were even complicit in this. After the first wedding night, did Laban tell Leah, "Okay, head on in"? And she said, "What? That was your wedding feast. You're heading in." Did Rachel anticipate for 7 years? She had to anticipate for 7 years. She knew that Jacob was going to be marrying her. So Rachel anticipated for 7 years. And did Laban have this cooked up all along? Sure he did. Laban knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that Jacob was going to come to him. This is the way to get rid of the ugly daughter. You just ship her out, you know. We trick somebody into taking the ugly one. When you actually look at the description for Leah, it just says she has funny eyes. I'm not quite sure what that means. To me, part of what it means is it's all you can see in that culture. They have the burqa things on, and all you can see is her eyes. And she's got funny eyes. I'm not sure I want the one with funny eyes. But they had week-long weddings. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to them, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what's that have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now, you look at that, and that's just an interesting statement. Jesus, they have no wine. So, you want me to run to the village and get some? Or are you just filling in information for me? But Mary and Jesus both knew what's going on. Now, it sounds kind of rude, but formal. It definitely wasn't, "Mom, what are we talking about?" It was kind of like madam. When you go up to your mom and you call her ma'am, it just puts a little bit of distance in there. And we see Jesus using this phrase in other places. This is the woman caught in adultery. Woman, where are they? Madam, where are they? It's actually a little bit of a sense of respect, but it's not personal. This is the woman at the well. Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father." This is a disrespected woman. A woman who is a Samaritan, a woman who is living with some guy who's not her husband, a woman who has either buried or divorced 5 men, and he gives her a little sense of respect. "Madam, believe me." And this is after the crucifixion. This is to Mary Magdalene. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" And this is to a woman who loves him desperately. And it's just a sense of respect, but also a little bit of a sense of distance. It's a very quiet miracle. You don't think about that when you look at the miracle at Cana, but you realize when you study it, it's a very, very quiet miracle. When the master of the feast tasted the water, which now became wine, and didn't know where it came from, the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom. There wasn't an announcement. Guys, we're out of wine. Behold, Jesus is going to turn this into wine. It is a very, very quiet miracle. The only people that knew were Mary, because she had requested it. If she didn't even know what she was requesting, but that's what she requested it. It says the servants knew. Can you imagine being one of those servants? Because they're completely in the dark. They have no idea what's going on. They're just these little peons told, go fill up the water the water things with water. Yes, sir. And they went out and filled up the water things. And then they said, okay, now pull some of that out and give it to the master of the feast. They said, huh? And they did. And so they said, whatever, because I'm the servant, that's all I do here. And so they pulled out some dippers full of the stuff and said, it looks like wine. And they took it to the master of the feast, who sipped it and said, you left the best wine for last. And the disciples knew. It was a very, very quiet miracle. There just wasn't a whole lot of hoopla about that particular miracle. Okay, here's another set of women from the house at Bethany. Bethany was a bedroom community for Jerusalem. It was 2 miles away. So think of Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. has all of these little suburbs that people stay in. And so Bethany was a bedroom community for Jerusalem because Jerusalem had this thing where you had these huge festivals, and people would descend from all over the world, literally all of the known world, to go to Jerusalem, and you need a place to stay. And so, as we see in the case of Jesus and his disciples, when they needed a place for the Last Supper, they sent somebody ahead and said, look for a man carrying a pitcher of water on his shoulder. Follow him, tell him we need an upper room. That was actually probably at the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark. We will talk about that one next year. It was about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. Close enough for Jerusalem visits, but too far for the pilgrimage feasts. Because a Sabbath day journey was 1,000 paces, and you don't make 2 miles in 1,000 paces unless you've got really long paces, kind of like the blue footprints out on the sidewalk. If your paces are that long, you may be able to make 2 miles in 1,000 of them, but I don't know. And so they stayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus and his disciples stayed in the Garden of Gethsemane for festivals. So they stayed in Bethany when they were in Jerusalem. They stayed in the Garden of Gethsemane when they were having festivals. That's why they needed a betrayer. They knew very well where Jesus was staying during the days leading up to the festivals, but they needed somebody to betray him to show them where he was staying when he was not in Bethany. You couldn't just bust into Bethany, into a wealthy family house in Bethany, and arrest him, because that's not going to go well. They needed to know where he was, so Judas came and said, I will lead you to the garden where he's staying, and we'll find him there. Bethany was also the place for the ascension. We see that in Luke 24:50. And he led them out as far as Bethany, and lifting up his hands, he blessed them. Now, if you go into the book of Acts, it says Mount Olivet. And Acts and Luke are written by the same author, so what's the conflict between Bethany and the Mount of Olives? It's kind of like talking about Mannheim and then talking about Penryn, which is kind of considered part of Mannheim, even though it's not part of Mannheim. So Bethany is kind of on the outskirts of the Mount of Olives, not actually on the Mount of Olives, but the Mount of Olives is kind of in Bethany territory. You got the feeling that Jesus and his disciples stayed at that house every time they had a chance. Matthew 21:17, and leaving them, they went out of the city to Bethany and lodged there. And he entered Jerusalem, went into the temple, and when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So you get the feeling that every time they were in Jerusalem, they would go out to Bethany. And I keep getting hit as I'm going through all of this with the different pace of life back then. Okay, Bethany is only 2 miles away. They walked 2 miles. They just went from Jerusalem to Bethany, but they walked for 2 miles. And so it's just kind of normal. That's what you have to do back in that culture. You ever think that that's kind of an oddity in that culture? Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, 2 single ladies and their single brother, all living in the same house, no husbands involved, no wives involved, just the 3 of them. Isn't that a little strange? There appears to be a reason for that. Okay, now this is a very wordy thing, but we're going to run through this. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served. We're going to talk about this later. And Lazarus was at one of those reclining with him at the table. Mary therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of perfume, but Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" So when you're translating a denarii is what? It's a day's wage. That perfume is close to a year's salary. The average 2025 salary in America is $63,795. So we can round it off and say that that is a $60,000 vial of perfume. You understand why Judas, who had the bag, was kind of like, hey, if you give me $300,000, I can skim off of $10,000 and nobody's going to even see it's gone. That was somewhere down in, but why would you choose Judas as your treasurer? I mean, they had somebody already in the disciples that appeared to be really good with money. Matthew. Yeah. Matthew should have been, but Matthew is a reformed crook. It is kind of like putting your wine cellar in charge of the reformed alcoholic. Yeah, we trust him, but. So let's get somebody honest, let's put Judas in there. And so when Jesus talks about the betrayal in the Last Supper, everybody said, yeah, that's Judas. We knew it was going to be Judas. They looked around and said, dude, I trust everybody else. I don't trust me. And they looked at themselves because they trusted Judas that much. Okay, now, let's look at a parallel to this. Okay, so this is the John version of that. And while he was in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he's reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 100 denarii, 300 denarii, and given to the poor. And they sold her. Does that sound familiar? Same story, but it's the house of Simon the leper. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus were in the house of Simon the leper. They were either his children, probably, or maybe the husband of Martha. That really skews my mind as far as Martha's age. She's not that old.
Over his head.
I think what it means is she kind of did everything. I think she kind of did head, feet, everything. And then there's actually a second anointing where a sinful woman anoints Jesus' feet and wipes the hair, his feet with her hair. And that's a totally different, some would like to make Mary into a sinful woman, which she's not. So there's 2 anointings that look very close, and you're right. This one, the one in Simon the leper, it's on his head. The fact that it's worth 300 and Judas Iscariot is criticizing makes you think that she probably anointed both head and feet. And again, you realize the value of things today different than value of things before. I of course went on Amazon to see if I could buy some nard, which I had no intention of bringing nard here. But nard is like $25 a container. So you can get it for a little cheaper than a year's wages today. So it would appear that they were at least relatively wealthy. They had a house large enough for guests. Probably all 13 of them fit in the house. They had a family burial crypt. Mary could afford a 300 denarii vial of perfume to give as a sacrifice. And there's apparently a large number of mourners at the funeral of Lazarus. So this is a wealthy, well-known family that Jesus was hanging out with. There's three main events recorded at that house. Martha serving while Mary listened, the raising of Lazarus, and the anointing of Mary of Jesus' feet and head, apparently, as well. We think of her at his feet. So we'll take a look at Martha. Martha, free to serve. And I can never study Martha without thinking of my mother-in-law. So if any of you know Martha Copenhaver, I need a picture of Martha Copenhaver right there. Martha Copenhaver is 90 years old, and if she finds out that your house needs cleaned, she will be knocking at your door the following morning, because that is Martha. And she has a sister, Mary, who recently died, who will sit at your feet while you talk. Now, as they went in their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha walked into her house, and she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her." The Martha, Martha always makes me think of him smiling and shaking his head. Martha, Martha. There is one other time when we see Jesus repeat somebody's name, which was? Maybe. I think actually you may be right. Then there's two. Simon, Simon. Interesting study of Peter is, I've often thought about this. You know, Peter had an old name and a new name. His name was Simon. And then Jesus said, "I'm going to name you Peter. I'm going to take you from Rocky to," this is not in my notes. Peter is, Peter is something else. All right, I should not have started down that road. But the point of my illustration is that Peter had an old name and a new name. And if you go through, Jesus will say, "Simon." The old guy is coming back. So every time Peter's in trouble, when he says Simon, any of you guys have a bad name? Stephen Bruce? I knew I was in trouble. So when Jesus said Simon, you knew that Peter was in trouble. Okay, so one of the things which is interesting with our study of the women through the Gospels, Luke constructed his book based on interviews. This has the feel of him interviewing Martha. So you get a feeling from this story, there's some personal stuff going on here, some stuff in people's heads that he shouldn't know. But he does know, and it appears like he's interviewing Martha. And so we see in Luke 1:1, this is the introduction to the book of Luke. "So many others have tried their hands at putting together a story of the wonderful harvest of scriptures and history that took place among us, using reports handed down by the original eyewitnesses who served the word with their very lives. Since I have investigated all the reports in close detail, starting from the story's beginning, I decided to write it all out for you, most honorable Theophilus." So if we look, and you look through the book of Acts, there are we passages and they passages. So we, you know that Luke is with the Apostle Paul. So as they're going into Jerusalem at the end of the last missionary journey, it says, "When we had come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present." So Paul, Luke, and the contingent went in and talked to the Jerusalem brethren. Paul is promptly arrested. The next time, that's in Acts 21. The next time that we show up is in Acts 27. And it was decided that we should sail for Italy. They delivered Paul and other prisoners to the centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And they sailed to Rome, the ship went down, they threw all the wheat overboard, and there's an upcoming fish story about the fish waiting for the wheat as it falls down through. So Luke apparently is with Paul or around Paul the entire time. So there is a 2-year gap between there, and Luke was apparently in Jerusalem and around Jerusalem for 2 years, probably wrote Luke and Acts during that period of time. So he interviewed the people that were in the area, but most of the men had left. Most of the men had gone out, either chased out or evangelizing. Actually, both. They were chased out and then did their evangelizing. So it's mostly women that are left. And I highly suspect that Mary, Mary the mother of Jesus was one, because we hear her story, but there's also Martha. You get the feeling that some of these things are so intimate in what people are thinking and what was said at a given time that Luke is interviewing Martha for this. So here's some things we pick out about Martha as we look at Martha. Martha was large and in charge. As they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha walked her into her house. So was Simon the leper still alive? I don't think so. This was her house. Martha was welcoming him into her house. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. She's in charge. Jesus is coming, we gotta go deal with this. Mary remained seated in the house. She was blunt. And she went up to him and said, "Lord, don't you care my sister left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me." Martha, can you be a little more clear here? We're not quite sure what you're trying to get across. Martha is very blunt. Somebody has described Martha to be the female Peter. Peter is the one that I describe Peter as being ambidextrous. He can stick either foot in his mouth. I am Peter. And you also get the feeling here that Mary very well may have been helping Martha serve. And Martha is serving, and Mary is kind of listening to Jesus, and she's serving a little closer to Jesus, and before you know it, Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, not serving at all, just listening to Jesus. And Martha is very blunt. She said, "Tell her to come." John 11:21, this is at the resurrection of Lazarus, and first words out of her mouth when she came to Jesus, she said, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died." Now what's interesting is that we're going to see in a minute that Mary had exactly the same words, but because it is Martha and Mary, they sound different. Martha is saying, "Lord, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died." And Mary is saying, "Lord, been there, he wouldn't have died." And this is one where I had to go to the King James because it just doesn't sound as good in the other versions. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he's been there 4 days." Blunt Mary. The ESV says, "By now there's an odor." Just doesn't sound the same. And so, "by now he's stinketh." And Martha, ever practical, ever blunt, says, "Lord, by now he's stinking." We really don't want to be rolling that stone away here. She was distracted. What distracts you? What distracts you? Any of you have trouble with distractions? One of the things I noticed yesterday is that when I was telling the stories, man, everybody was glued. But as soon as you're into this stuff, people, phones, we've got, other stuff. We've got things happening. We get distracted. Distractions are often when the important interferes with the critical. We only have so much time. Did this fit well into everybody's schedule? Is there stuff that y'all could be doing other than being here today? Is any of your mind drifting that direction? Like I said, man, I got somebody from Wayne County texting me. I got somebody from York County, from Berks County texting me, saying, dude, can you be out? Man, this is critical. That's important. This is critical. And so distractions are often, we have some non-critical stuff too. I mean, we have technology. And the phone rings. And somebody texts you. And somebody, has an issue that they need to deal with. And then there's a video clip. And you're ready for bed, but you didn't finish the video clip in Facebook yet. And sometimes we need to figure out what is important and what's critical. So for a married couple, and that's why the Apostle Paul talks about it and says, I would that you all be like me. And then you go down through, and Paul says that a married man or a married person needs to focus on their spouse and on their children and on their affairs. And I'm going to walk out of here, and I have this thing on Do Not Disturb, and when I pick it up, I'll probably have somebody that needs money or wants something. And I need to decide where that fits in my world. Is it important or is it critical? And if one of my bio kids contacts me, that automatically moves up into the critical category. We had to decide that at one point, where our children actually called a family meeting and said, what you're doing is all cool and all that, but you're leaving us out. And so we had to make some decisions and some planning to get our bio kids back on the top of the critical. Church attendance is more of a problem than it ever was before. I don't remember ever that we had as many people missing in August. My Sunday school class of 2 weeks ago was really funny. I am getting ready to leave home. I have a text from the Sunday school superintendent saying, hey, I see you're scheduled to teach the post-high. Would you mind teaching the sanctuary instead? We're going to blend a couple classes together. And I made the mistake of not responding, just hurrying to church. Because I didn't respond, the Sunday school superintendent got somebody else, so I walked in, somebody else was getting ready to teach. So I walked into the post-high youth class, and nobody was there. No, there were 3 kids there. And I said, y'all go in with the high school class, and so I didn't teach at all that week. But is church critical? Well, I don't know. Is it critical if you're spending time with family somewhere? These are all decisions we need to make. But Mary was distracted. And he said, you're anxious and troubled about many things. I was sitting in the back, and honestly, you're anxious and troubled about many things. I got stuff running through my head, and I'm thinking, Steve, get your head together, you got to teach here, and you're anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is necessary. Can we pick out the one thing, the critical thing? Mary has chosen the good portion. Okay, I want you to picture this. So, Martha is getting the meal ready. And she is so concerned that everybody's got enough stuff. And, the duck is underdone, so we need to, put the flames up under a little bit. And the lamb is overdone, so we need to pull it away. Do we have enough clean plates? And Mary, what are you doing, Mary, sitting over by Jesus again? Jesus says, on a play of words, Mary has chosen the good portion. Martha is all worried about the portions. And Jesus is saying Mary has chosen the good portions. Martha is concerned about all the portions, all the details of the perfect feast. They're important. But the critical part was that Jesus was there. She was a woman of faith. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany. The village of Mary and her sister Martha was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So his sister sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death, it's for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed for 2 days longer in the place where he was. Isn't that interesting? He loved Mary and Martha, so he stayed for 2 days. But it doesn't really fit, right? 2 words for love in here, which is interesting. So Lazarus is described as a friend, and that he loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus with an unconditional love, with the agape love. He was away across the Jordan River, and so he was over kind of in that area, had to go to Bethany. It's about a day's journey. So, let's do some math. Jesus was in the Transjordan, so he's about a day's journey away. He waited 2 days before leaving. I know this is Friday, but we do like 1 + 2. So he's 3 days away. By the time Jesus arrives, it is 4 days after the messenger is sent. By the time Jesus waits 2 days, spends a day going back, it's now 4 days after the messenger is originally sent out. He'd been in the tomb for 4 days. So Lazarus was dead before the messenger ever got to Jesus. Jesus knew that. And he said, we'll just have a couple more days here, and then we'll head over. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming and met him, she went to meet him. Martha said to him, Lord, if you'd been here, you wouldn't have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Did Martha know what she was saying? I'm not sure Mary knew what she was saying in Cana. Just do whatever he says. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you're the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Remember I said that Martha is kind of the female version of Peter. That's kind of Martha's version of Peter's confession. You're the Lord. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe. Mary is in all 3 stories. She's quiet in the background. She can be lost in the brashness of Martha, just one another of the biblical Marys. One of those 1 in 4 or 5 in the New Testament times that's called Mary, and just kind of slid in the background. Sometimes you and I need to look for that Mary. I have a young man who a couple months ago called me and said, Grandpa, can we talk about girls? And that's kind of a long story, but I ultimately said, look for the quiet one in the back of the room. You're not wanting the one who is flaunting herself in up front. Look for the quiet one in the back of the room. We see the loud one, Martha, Martha. But then we see that Mary is drawn. It says, when she had said this, she went and called from her sister Mary, saying, the teacher's here and is calling for you. Jesus is looking for the quiet one in the back of the room. Martha came running to him And Jesus said, I've talked to you, I need to talk to Mary. And he called for Mary. Mary had the empathy of her friends. When the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her. They didn't follow Martha. Martha's in Martha business. But when they saw Mary get up, they had the empathy to get up and follow her. And like I said, this is the cry. From Martha, it was an accusation. From Mary, it was a cry. In the third scene, Mary takes center stage. In Matthew 26:13, Jesus said, truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. 2,000 years later, we're talking about it. John 11, 1-2. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with anointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother was ill. You know what? This actually takes place before the anointing. So a chapter later, in John 12, John is going to tell the story of the anointing, but when he's telling his story, he just wanted to say, okay, so the village of Mary and her sister Martha, and there's like a zillion Marys, so you know which Mary it was. It's the Mary that anointed the Lord with ointment. And again, Brenda, if you look at this, it doesn't say anointed his feet with ointment. Apparently she did his head and his feet and wiped his feet with her hair then after doing his feet. Her gift was voluntary. Her gift was the best obtainable. Do you check your checking account before you give money? Which is probably wise. But it was the best obtainable. It was generous in quantity. Try going to a perfume store and saying, I'd like a pound of perfume, please. They say, what? You don't sell perfume by the pound. What's the deal here? She used a pound of perfume on him. It was silent. Mary didn't say, okay, guys, look what I'm going to be doing here. Just keep my... She very quietly slid off and did her thing. It was planned. Jesus said, leave her alone. She bought it so she might keep it for the day of my burial. What does that mean? I'm not sure what that means. Did she keep it thinking that he was going to be killed and that she would use it? Or was he saying it metaphorically? She bought it to anoint my feet, but it's really for my burial. It was personal. Wiping his feet with her hair was as personal as you could get. It wasn't just kind of a distant, we'll throw some perfume at you. It was personal. It was apparent to all in the result. It may have been silent, but after, very, very quickly, people are, I smell nard. And they looked over and it filled the whole room. And, your gifts and your offerings may not be apparent at the beginning, but it someday will be. It was criticized. It reflects not the heart of Mary, but the heart of Judas. And so, I'm not sure how y'all take criticism. I don't do criticism all that well. And I get criticized a lot because I stick my neck out a lot. And I don't do criticism real well. But we need to see that this was the heart of Judas, not the heart of Mary. And we may need to that was legitimate, or you know what, that reflects your heart, not mine. The commended by Jesus. The problem, we hear the critics, but we don't hear the well done, the good and faithful servant part of it. And it was used far beyond its original purposes. Truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed, the whole world, what she's done, be told in memory of her. You know what? That may be the most important verse concerning Mary. She did what she could. Jesus calls for nothing more than that. Do what you can. And there's times when you give somebody a $10 bill and you say, that's all I could do. And Jesus said, that's exactly what I want you to do. Do what you can. Rather than hold it back and say, what's $10 anyway? You do what you can. Now here's our woman at the well. Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. Well, kind of, sort of. Had to pass through Samaria. So there's three options. They're going from Jerusalem up to the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum, no doubt. And so here's the most straightforward place. Right through. But the problem being the Samaritans and the Jews didn't like each other much. And so you could go that way, which still was officially in Samaritan territory. So you get Samaria dust on your feet. You didn't really see the Samaritans going that way, but you got Samaritan dust on your feet. And so you might want to take that road around and avoid Samaria totally and go across the Jordan River. But it says Jesus had to pass through Samaria. Why did he have to pass through? I believe he had to pass through because there was somebody he needed to talk to. Pius crossed the Jordan. The Samaritans were more tolerant if you were leaving Jerusalem. They were a little less likely to accept you if you were going to Jerusalem. A Samaritan village rejects Jesus. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him, but the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. So if you're leaving Jerusalem, the Samaritans are likely to say, cool, you're leaving Jerusalem. We wish everybody would leave Jerusalem. You're welcome through. If you're heading toward Jerusalem, they might not, and that's where Peter and James and John wanted to call down fire on them, and Jesus called them sons of thunder. Jesus was hot and tired. It was not a convenient time for witnessing. Jacob's well was there, for Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour, which would be noon. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. Stupid phone. For his disciples had gone away to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. And so one of the ideas being, if you ask for a drink from the Samaritan woman, it has cooties because she has touched the water. And so this is unclean water, and Jesus didn't really care. That is, if you go to Israel today, that is the well right there. I'm actually going to skip that whole thing. Samaritan woman had 3 strikes against her. She was a Samaritan. Jews and Samaritans didn't get along well. That goes the whole way back to the Babylonian captivity. In the northern kingdom, the Assyrians defeated the northern kingdom, and the way the Assyrians dealt with that stuff is they deported as many people as they could, brought in others, so that you just didn't feel like defending the land, because it wasn't really your land anyway. And then they would have the foreign gods coming in, and if you go back into the 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, you see that there were problems because the foreign gods were in the northern kingdom of Israel, and so the land wasn't doing well, and the wild animals were coming in, and so they said, what's the problem? The problem is that we're serving other gods, so they brought priests in of God's priests, and they kind of mixed everything together. And so we have a mixture of God's law and Assyrian law and whatever countries came in, and you have mixed blood. And those were the Samaritans. And so she was a Samaritan, and if you did a DNA test on a Samaritan, it would just be this mishmash of all kinds of people from all over the world rather than Jewish. And she was a woman. We talked about this on Monday, how the rabbis in Jesus' time said, don't even talk to women in the street. You know, it's just not cool. You're risking Gehenna by talking to a woman. And she had run through 5 husbands and was living with somebody not her husband. And so, you know, do you talk to those people? Do you stop in the street and you talk to the person with purple hair? Do you talk to the guy with tattoos all down his face? Do you talk to the guy who can't get out 5 words without an F word somewhere in there? Do you talk to those people? Jesus was willing to talk to this lady who had the 3 strikes against her. She was poor enough that she couldn't send a servant for water. She had no daughters of an age to get the water. Normally, the oldest girl in the family went to the well for water. Eliezer took advantage of that, and he found Rebekah by the well. Jacob found Rachel by the well. King Saul and his servants went to a well and asked the girls at the well for directions. The woman was enough of an outcast that she came in the middle of the day. You didn't come in the middle of the day, you came first thing in the morning. She was trying to avoid people. She didn't want people to see her because she was ashamed. She was no longer young. She had run through 5 husbands and was living with a 6th. Why was she living with a 6th guy? Probably because nobody else wanted to marry her. She was done. She was used. She was ashamed. She was embarrassed. She was hiding. And she wasn't actively seeking Jesus. That's why I believe that when we go out into our world, we live in a world that is not actively seeking Jesus, but they're actively seeking for something for that God-shaped hole. All right, let's confess this. I was looking at videos on Facebook last night. And there was one on there about joining the Amish. Now, the comments on this will be really interesting. There are so many positive comments on that from people saying, this world is so lost. I just want to put it all behind. The Amish have it right. Do we need to stop apologizing for who we are? Do we need to stop being embarrassed for being conservatives? I think we need to live lives as people who know that we're right. I grew up as a little brother in the family. I got 2 older brothers, 2 older sisters. And I learned that, if you get in an argument, they kind of beat you down. And so you just don't get in arguments anymore. And then I learned something really cool. There is nothing more fun than being right and not arguing about it. Because after a while, they start stuttering and they suddenly discover they're wrong. That's how we need to live our lives. We need to live our lives as somebody who knows the truth and we're living the truth. And we look around at their world and say, we don't want your world. We don't want your marriages. We don't want your illegitimate children. We don't want your drug and alcohol issues. We don't want your mismanagement of money. We don't want your dying with no family. We got it right. And I'm willing to live in my world and demonstrate to my world, with or without a message, that we're right. This woman was not actively seeking Jesus. Jesus, I believe, went deliberately through Samaria because he was seeking her. And probably divorced. As soon as she found out that he was a prophet, she asked a burning question that was in the hearts of a Jew-Samaritan argument for years. The woman said, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. She had heard both sides of the Gerizim-Jerusalem argument all of her life and trusted nobody. So the Samaritans believed only the Pentateuch. The Jews believed the prophets and the histories and the poetry and wisdom in the Old Testament. And so because of the Pentateuch, the Samaritans said that the temple should be on Shechem, which was overlooked Mount Gerizim, which is where Abram had built his first altar. So they built a temple there. The Jews destroyed it in 186 BC, and the Samaritans were still mad. Jesus said, but the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. That's how we worship. We worship inwardly, and we worship with a properly revealed doctrine. So can worship be with a rock band in a loud auditorium? As long as you're worshiping inwardly with properly revealed doctrine. You listen to some of the lyrics, and the lyrics are not real. They sound good, but they don't match with the Bible. So we need to be careful with some of that stuff. And many Samaritans from the town believed him, and he stayed for 2 days. We have a 2-day theme here where Jesus is kind of hanging around for 2 days. We've got our schedules. I've got like 10 minutes left. Gotta go. Time's up. Mary Magdalene and the other women. Soon afterward, he went on through the cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Now, it gives the impression that all of these women had some sort of evil spirits or sicknesses or illnesses of some sort. So we have Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their means. I live in a magic house. Some of you live in a magic house. I live in a magic house. There's a magic hamper. I put dirty laundry in it, and a couple days later, it just reappears clean and folded in my dresser drawer. Food appears in empty cupboards. I open the refrigerator, and then I open the refrigerator tomorrow, and there's food that wasn't there before. I take a nap, and I wake up to food on the table. These women that travel with Jesus provide some of the magic. The women that came with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. So what was their thought? Their thought was, he needs ointments and spices. And so they went home and they prepared the ointments and spices. That's what they did for his entire ministry. They followed Jesus, and they were wealthy, apparently. Some of them were wealthy, and so they provided money. Went into the village and bought stuff. There were unseen logistics of the ministry. You just think about Jesus, traipsing from place to place. For 3 years, he had no income. He apparently had no place to live. He stayed in Capernaum, some probably in Peter's house. We see when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set face to Jerusalem. We actually had this verse earlier, but he sent messengers ahead of him. So there's logistics that go along with this. They were probably looking for lodging. Where are we going to stay for the night? The woman at the well we had just covered, they went to the city to buy food. At the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus says to Philip, where are we to buy bread so these people may eat? So he's talking to Philip like, got a problem here. And Philip's saying, dude, I don't know. 200 denarii wouldn't be enough. 200 days' wages wouldn't be enough. Apparently, Philip had been running this math in his head already. That's why Jesus talked to Philip. Some thought because Jesus had the money bag. So Judas handled the money. We talked about that. You trust somebody? We trust Judas. He's a faithful guy. Buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So there was a small group of mostly wealthy women that followed him. Mary from Magdala, Joanna, the wife of Herod Antipas's household manager. It is thought that she may have been one of the people that Luke interviewed, because there's some little details in there that you need an insider to know about. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad. How did you know? Because Joanna said so. For he had long desired to see him because he had heard about him, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. And also in the Herod company, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that day. How did Luke know to write that down? Probably because he talked to Joanna, and Joanna knew. Susanna and many others. And the many others included Mary, the mother of Jesus, Salome, whom I'm going to talk about momentarily, and the other Mary. I always find that one interesting. She is the other Mary. Wouldn't that be great? Which Mary is coming over for dinner? It's the other Mary. And there are also women looking on from a distance, from whom were, and this is at the cross, were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James the younger, and Joseph and Salome. And when he was in Galilee, they followed him. So I just want this to show that this is the group that was in Galilee. Now we're in Judea. Then we were in Galilee. So this is the same group that was in Galilee, but there were also many others who came up with him into Jerusalem. So apparently there were some that were from Judea as well that came up to the crucifixion. So they were in Galilee, and there were other women as well. Mary of Magdala. Magdala is a fishing village along the Sea of Galilee. If you're driving, it takes 13 minutes, according to Google Maps. She was delivered from 7 demons and something that became part of her identity. Which Mary is this? She's the one from Magdala, and she's the one that had the 7 demons cast out. It's something that kind of follows her. And we assume that she's from a wealthy family because she was hanging out with a group of wealthy women. She followed him in Galilee, and she was at the cross. She was passionate in her support of Jesus. She watched the body being placed in the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. She came to the empty tomb when the Sabbath was past. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go and anoint him. And entering the tomb, so they actually walked into the tomb, Mary Magdalene would have been the one that saw an angel sitting to the right, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. She ran to tell the disciples. Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other woman with them who told them these things to the apostles. And we see in John, and when Mary, and he is following Mary's story, so she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciples. You almost got the feeling that Mary was kind of younger and more athletic, and she went burning ahead of everybody else, and she told them, and then the other 3 women, or the other women, however many it was, followed and confirmed the story. The fact that John is telling it also, I want to mention a legend that says that Mary Magdalene eventually moved to Ephesus with John and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and the 3 of them lived there. She returned to the tomb and was the first person Jesus appeared to. Then Simon Peter came and followed him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and for as yet they didn't understand the scripture, he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look inside the tomb. And then she saw the 2 angels in white. Now that's interesting because Peter and John were just there and did not see the angels. They walked in and saw the angels, and they said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" The angels did. Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And said to him, "Sir, if you carry him away, where have you laid him? I'll take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him, Aramaic, Rabboni. And the whole concept of a post-resurrection body. Jesus often was not recognized immediately. And I think our post-resurrection body is going to be pretty cool. It can walk through walls. It can eat a fish if it wants to. It doesn't have to eat a fish if it doesn't have to. And it can run and not be weary. And Jesus said, do not cling to me. Was she clinging to him? Was he trying to cling to him? And it appeared later on, Jesus said, touch me, put your fist in my side. But it's almost like Jesus was like a little bit between worlds right now. And he told Mary, just don't touch me. It's not safe. All right. Very quickly now, we are out of time, I do believe. It's got to be out of time. Right, even we're out of time if I keep fooling with that. Yeah, we have enough time for this yet, and then we'll call it done. Okay, so here's some sorting out that gets a little confusing because all four of the gospel writers have lists of women at the cross. So if we look at Mark, Matthew, and John, it says Mary Magdalene was there. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, so then we have Mary, the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. Mary, the wife of Clopas. So we can say that, that's the same woman there. And Salome. And Salome, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, and his mother's sister. Does that? I have it in yellow, and yellow is just not showing up there. Okay, Salome, the mother of the sons of Zebedee, and his mother's sister are all the same person. So we take from that is that Mary's sister was Salome, who was married to Zebedee. And so she was Aunt Salome. And his mother was there. So that's women at the cross, women at the tomb. Mary Magdalene is at the tomb. Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, is at the tomb. Salome's at the tomb. Joanna is also at the tomb. That's the only time that shows up. And again, notice it comes from Luke, who I think interviewed Joanna. She's the one who is the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward. Salome, I'm just going to fly through this, and I think we're out of slides. Salome, so here we have the calling of Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And so it says they brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. It says that James and John were partners with Simon. So apparently everybody owned boats together there. Going on a little further, he saw James and John, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat. Now, I want y'all to sympathize with Zebedee here. Nobody talks about Zebedee. I'm all for Zebedee. So Zebedee has this thriving fishing business going, and all of a sudden, the boats are left with Zebedee. And Zebedee is saying, like, dude, what's going on? Peter left. My sons left. Where's everybody going? And Salome is saying, who you talking to? I'm leaving too. His wife left too. And so Zebedee loses his sons, his wife, and his fishing business. Salome also, if you remember the story, went up to Jesus at one point and said, I have something to ask you. And there's another version of it in Luke, maybe, where James and John go up and say, Jesus, just give us whatever we ask. And Jesus said, so what is it? And so she says, I want them at the right and left hand. Jesus said, you don't want your asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink? And they said to him, so that means that they're hanging in the background. Mom's talking to Jesus, they're hanging in the background. And Jesus said, are you able to drink the cup that I'm to drink? And they said, we're able. I wonder if she thought about the request and the cup while she's at the cross watching Jesus. James was the first of the disciples to be killed. He's the only one that shows up in the Gospels, in the Acts, actually, to be killed. John was the only one to die of old age, somewhere in his 90s. And the last of the book of John, John writes down, so saying spread abroad among the brothers that this disciple was not to die. John wrote the book of John in his old age. All the other disciples had died. And there's this kind of this poignant tone to this particular verse. So the sayings abroad that this disciple will never die. Yet Jesus didn't say to him that he wasn't to die, but that if it's my will that you remain till I come. What's that to you? Y'all may have thought that this class would never die, but we are done. Father in God, BBI 2025, we once again come screeching into the finish line, and you have been there. And you may not have always been there in the obvious places. Father, take these words and let them settle somewhere and grow, produce seeds and fruit and growth. Help us all to be a little closer to you because of these women that were tied up and wrapped up in the life of Jesus. Be with the concluding classes of the afternoon, be with our interactions, guide us as we all go home. And as we rub elbows with our world, that they may see us and know that we have seen you. And bring all these things in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, our advocate, our strength, our wisdom, our safety, and let it be so.